And he writes, "The intellectualism in Unitarian Universalism comes with a culture of stillness. We are expected to sit quietly in our seats, listen intently with no emotion on our faces and no movement in our bodies. We are supposed to wait until after the service to express ourselves. I grew up," he says, "in a culture of engagement. We had permission to respond to the service, to say amen when we were moved by the words or the music, to clap our hands or smile or nod. We lived the hymn when the Spirit says do every time we gathered for worship." He says, "I have had to learn to restrain myself in UU circles. The first time I preached at a UU congregation, I was unsure of how my sermon was being received because there was no visible response. It wasn't until after the service," he says, "that I learned that people really enjoyed the sermon. And even now," he concludes, "I get slightly unnerved by the lack of response." Now, of course, there's no right or wrong way to respond in a worship setting. But do we, in fact, communicate that all ways of responding are welcome in this space? Or is there an implicit norm that some ways of responding are more welcome than other ways of responding? And then one last example, a little bit of a different example. Since 2008, our most visible social justice campaign has been called Standing on the Side of Love. Maybe you're familiar with it. And some UUs with disabilities had objected from the beginning that they were not able to stand, and they did not see themselves represented in that language. Now, these objections were largely discounted by saying that, of course, standing is intended to be metaphorical. It's a metaphor. The problem, though, was exacerbated when UUs with disabilities went to some of these Standing on the Side of Love justice events and found that they were not really designed to be fully accessible to people who were limited in their range of motion. So indeed, you did have to literally be able to stand on the side of love to stand on the side of love at these events. As of now, the Standing on the Side of Love campaign is reconsidering its name, and there is a group called Equal Access, which is helping develop and implement standards for accessibility for UU congregations. Now, these examples might seem outrageous to you, they might seem relatively trivial, they might land somewhere in between, but they are included as examples of the subtle or not so subtle ways that our majority white, majority middle class, majority able-bodied UU spaces communicate norms about who is welcome and who is not welcome. And these norms may be less welcoming than how we all aspire to be. The point is not to malign anyone or to make anyone out to be a bad person with bad intentions. It's just reality. What we all aspire to, the kind of community that we want to have, is not an easy thing to create. We envision a beloved community grounded in our first principle of the inherent worth and dignity of each person, practicing our second principle of justice, equity, and compassion, and our third principle of acceptance of one another. This kind of community of radical welcome doesn't just happen. It requires intentionality. And so in the last 5 years or so, there's been a desire voiced by many to make this vision of radical welcome and inclusion more explicit, to pull it out of those other principles and highlight it as its own principle, a proposed eighth principle. Now, in 2017, the board of the UUA, Unitarian Universalist Association, appointed a commission to study the issue, and if they approve the adoption of an eighth principle, it goes to 2 consecutive General Assemblies. It has to be passed by both. So we're at the very beginning of a multi-year process. The text of the proposed eighth principle in its current form, it will no doubt change, is in your bulletin, and it reads like so. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Now that is a little wordy because that is how we roll as Unitarian Universalists, right? Never say something in a sentence if you can say it in 5 paragraphs. So let's take this like bit by bit. We covenant to affirm and promote. That's what we do here within Unitarian Universalism, right? We make commitments, and it's our shared commitments that bind us together despite our theological differences. We covenant to journey towards spiritual wholeness. Journey towards it, meaning we recognize that we are not there yet. If we were there, there would be no work to do. And the society that we inhabit does not look like the world that we dream of. To get there, we have to go on a journey. And that means it'll take time, and we may get lost, and we will no doubt encounter delays and setbacks. We are journeying towards wholeness. One of the conditions of the society that we are in is that people are not whole. And this statement is another way of echoing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said that we are all bound up in a single garment of destiny such that I cannot be free until you are free. And so in a society divided by hatred and prejudice, where some people are not free, none of us can truly be whole. We recognize in this principle the harm done to everyone, to all of us, by things like racism and sexism and ableism and transphobia and so on. Continuing, we covenant to journey towards wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community. So that is our dream explicitly stated. We want a beloved community where all people are made welcome in the fullness of their selves. A community that is necessarily diverse and multicultural. And note, we have to build this community. It won't just happen. And finally, to build this community, it says we will have to take actions to dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. In other words, it's not enough to just disagree with systems of oppression. We have to intentionally dismantle them. And we recognize that these systems live in institutions, but they also live in our hearts. This does not make us bad people. It makes us human beings. But it means we recognize that we will have some personal work to do on this journey. That is part of it, spiritual growth as people. So that's the 8th principle. And as I said, it'll be several years before it could be adopted as an official principle of Unitarian Universalism. But UU congregations are independent, and we don't have to necessarily wait around for what the official organization is going to adopt. Some congregations have already begun seriously engaging with this principle, and UUI is one of those congregations. This year, the UUI board adopted the 8th principle as a guiding principle to direct their work. And over the course of the next several months, we're inviting the congregation, meaning all of you, into a conversation about what it would mean for ourselves as individuals and for our church community if we adopted this principle as a congregation at the congregational meeting in May. So we want to talk about and think about how would we live out a commitment to create an intentionally multicultural, anti-racist, anti-oppressive church. How would we bring that commitment down from the lofty realm of our principles and place it into the DNA of this place as an institution and into our own personal religious commitments? What would it be like if we felt that as a personal religious commitment that we lived out? What would it look like if the different committees of this church, membership, fine arts, music, the green team, the religious education council, the worship team, and so on, all understood that this commitment was an integral part of their purpose, and it was written into their charter that this was part of how they were to understand the meaning of their work. Right, so these are the kinds of things that we want to talk about, and you are all invited to be a part of this conversation. As some next steps, there's a radical welcoming workshop on Sunday, January 21st, right after the service, which is a very sort of practical workshop on how to welcome people across difference and some of the pitfalls that come up. If you did not attend the one we had back in October, we hope you can attend this one, but we will continue to offer these periodically throughout the year. And then on February 25th, after the service, we're going to have our first 8th Principle Workshop, where we are going to invite people to stay after the service, share thoughts and feelings on this proposed principle, and help us imagine possibilities. And these will be, some structured questions and conversation, and then some time for people to just brainstorm and share. And we hope that everyone will attend. Adopting the 8th principle would mean making a commitment to lift up the stories and experiences and needs that aren't always centered in Unitarian Universalism. It would mean opening ourselves to new ways of being and new possibilities of what Unitarian Universalism could look like and sound like and move like and speak like and committee meeting have like. There will still be coffee. I think it's an exciting prospect personally. I'm excited by this. I believe our values as UUs firmly point us in this direction. It will not necessarily be an easy journey. I'm sure there will be surprises and setbacks, but if we set out, we will have each other as traveling companions along the way. I believe if we undertake this journey, we will walk with the blessing of our ancestors who have worked to live out these ideals for so long. And I believe we will carry all of our children with us to a better place. Blessed be, and amen.